Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Human Face of D-Day, Walking the Battlefields of Normandy. Essays, reflections, and conversations with veterans of the longest day, by Colonel Retired Keith M. Nightingale. Narrated by Adam Barr. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940 to 1941. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man-to-man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. Signed, Dwight D. Eisenhower. The Point of the Spear. The invasion of Normandy in June 1944 was the largest single military operation this planet has ever seen, and could be the greatest single event in our civilization to date. And this operation was but a small portion of the much larger efforts going on elsewhere, in the Pacific, the Mediterranean, and in Russia. Despite its rather minor resourcing compared to the whole, its outcome would largely determine the future of the entire Allied effort. At Arlington Cemetery, we all recognize and honor the area reserved for the tomb of the unknown soldier. The constant guard mount and the reverence for the place and what it means leaves a lasting impression on all who visit it. So it is with Normandy. Normandy exhibits the same spirit, honor, and reverence for the sense and purity of purpose that we attest to Arlington. First out the door on the Cotentin. First off the ramp on Dog White. They, and the thousands that followed them, brought light to a dark place, and symbolized what our civilization is all about. It was here, on the sand and in the swamps and villages of Normandy, that we showed the world what we were truly about. Simply put, Normandy truly is ground where ordinary people did extraordinary things. This action encapsulated all that is good about our society and left a spirit of meaningful service that will live long after all involved have passed away. It has been my privilege to have walked the beaches, hills, and towns of Normandy with many of those who fought there. They each imparted a unique, highly personal view of their experience. Together, over many years, these vignettes have created for me a great tapestry of their actions there, and reinforced the righteousness of the effort. In my annual terrain walks each June with active duty troops, I do my best to retell what the veterans have told me, and to transfer their sense of service to those that have followed. It is awe-inspiring to see the faces of the soldiers as they walk the positions, and hear what Private First Class Hall said about his experience at Omaha, or Bob Murphy's recollection of Owens holding La Fiere. This book encapsulates my experiences in gathering the story from the originals, through their voices and recollections. The staff rides are their voices and descriptions. The human face behind the facts of D-Day. It was and is an honor to be part of the bridge to history, joining the old with the new. Introduction. At the age of 10, I discovered Life Goes to War, a picture history of World War II, published by Life magazine. For whatever reason, the section on Normandy and D-Day was burned into me. As my interest progressed from adolescent wonder to an adult obsession, the events of that day became a lodestone for my life. In 1984, having become an officer in the U.S. Army myself, I brought the 82nd Airborne back to Normandy for the first time since the war to celebrate the 40th anniversary of D-Day. Ever since, I have led yearly staff rides on all the sites of Operation Overlord, recounting what I have learned so active duty troops would see and feel the bridge between what happened then and their tasks for today. This book is a reflection of my 50-plus years walking the ground of Normandy and speaking to literally hundreds of veterans about that significant day. I began to learn of Normandy from the originals on my first trip there in 1977. I walked along Omaha, met a number of veterans, and just listened and questioned them. As an active duty soldier, they were anxious that I understand what had happened to them at this place. They responded to my questions with specificity. They were not hesitant to discuss casualties or the quality of their associates, things they normally would not relate to a civilian who might not understand. As an officer in the airborne and ranger communities, I gained unique access, both formally and otherwise, to the veterans. I walked Omaha with first-wave veterans and heard their stories. I followed General James Gavin around the 82nd sites, listened to Colonel Terrence Otway at Merville Battery, and heard Major John Howard at Pegasus Bridge. They and their associates painted unique, on-site pictures in my mind's eye that I hope I have transferred to this book. On my annual trips to Normandy from 1977 through 2018, I met veterans of all elements and was able to compile a remarkable collection of their personal impressions and descriptions of events on D-Day and throughout the Normandy campaign. Having served as a unit commander from platoon through brigade in the 82nd Airborne Division, I had already been granted significant one-on-one interviews and had multiple informal discussions with key leaders, even before I returned to France as the task force commander in 1984. These included exchanges with men at the cutting edge, like Generals Omar Bradley, Joe Collins, Matthew Ridgway, James Gavin, and Benjamin Vandervoort, the latter two becoming close friends who visited my battalions and spoke to my troops numerous times. I also developed lifelong associations with many lesser-known veterans of Normandy, whose recollections provide a true picture of the grunt thrown into the most significant operation of the war. I did not initially do any formal interviews, just walk-alongs and listening. Afterwards, I would make notes in my Green Army notebook and annotate with a name if I remembered. Some were anonymous/not remembered, but their input was significant. It was only much later, in preparation for the 40th anniversary and during the battle staff rides, that anything approximating an interview was done. I continued to collect input during my many return trips and simple informal discussions with the veterans. Many of the personalities, Bob Murphy, James Gavin, Ben Vandervoort, Bud Lomell, James Hill, and Bill Sullivan, were almost a continual dialogue. Some, such as the British commanders, were one-time affairs, but quite academic in nature, e.g., in-depth discussions in a formal atmosphere. What I found most striking was the very human, emotional aspects many of the veterans attached to their experiences. Many had not been in combat before and wondered if they could perform for their buddies. This was a common concern. I can't fail. I wonder how I will do. This sort of point they would discuss with me as a fellow soldier who could appreciate the thought. On the annual staff rides, I would have the troops with me and address the points of the place. If I knew of a veteran on site, I would ask them to speak. Some would go on at length as to actions. Others would demur but listen intently. All the veterans were anxious to meet the troops and would readily engage in conversation. I can honestly say that I learned a new fact or nuance to a specific event almost every year as part of this process, such as the Brecourt men, recalling how zombie-like they were and how upset they were when told to attack Brecourt. Or Bob Murphy, showing exactly where he low-crawled to deliver the message to Staff Sergeant Bill Owens at Fiere to hold at all costs. This was and is a humbling experience. After each staff ride, veterans would seek me out, wanting to talk about their personal experiences at the place we had just visited. It was as if each had capped a pressurized well inside himself and suddenly felt ready to open the valve. Most often, they would be accompanied by eagerly listening family members. I would ask one or two basic questions. What unit were you in? Where did you land? What happened? What was your impression? These questions usually started off a monologue by the veteran, a sudden freeing of a long-carried burden. Details, feelings, and opinions freely coursed, releasing an ocean of hitherto withheld experiences. Finally exhausted, the veteran would stop, gather himself, and fall silent. The troops would applaud, and he and his family would move on. On numerous occasions, relatives returned to tell me they had had no idea until that very day what the veteran had done during the war. There was a consistent thread with virtually all of them. They had no ego, bravado, or sense of great self-importance. Rather, they were quite humble, but immensely proud of being part of the invasion and what it meant for the world. Many spoke of the American cemetery, their friends who had fallen, and how fortunate they were to survive. It was extremely important to them that I and the troops understood what had happened and the price it took to achieve results. They invariably mentioned the Omaha cemetery in making their point. On more than one occasion, there were tears. The more senior of the originals, the colonels and generals, spoke appropriately, on their level and the command issues or management aspects. They were universally aware of the written histories and would often make corrections or provide the rest of the story to an issue. Why General James Hill chose Terence Otway or John Howard for their specific tasks. Gavin emphasizing Owen's and Captain John Dolan's exceptional performance. Or Vandervoort on Lieutenant Turner Turnbull's actions at Neuville. Altogether, these interviews, walkabouts, bar discussions, letters, phone calls, and casual encounters revealed the true human aspects of the invasion and the deeply personal thoughts and feelings of the participants. They well knew the significance of the tasks they had been assigned to do and wanted to ensure that we understood mission accomplishment and the cost. In totality, these encounters stoked the fire of my obsession and reinforced it as a worthy cause, and as something that needed to be remembered each year as the veterans have passed. The veterans got it. By that, I mean they truly understood what happened there and took pride in what they did and what their history is. In some future dark place, they will reflect upon what they saw and felt in Normandy and draw on an inner resolve to do likewise. I cannot speak on the latter, but the former is universal for every year I have participated. I hear it in their voices, but more importantly, I see it in their eyes. If this book stands out from the crowd of publications on Normandy, as I hope, it is because it reveals the human aspects of the invasion through the thoughts and feelings of the participants in a uniquely personal way. General Gavin arranged for more than 100 veterans and their families to attend the events of 1984 and personally led the discussions at La Fiere Bridge. Dozens of veterans added their insights to each event. It is their observations, recollections, and comments that I have included in this book. This book is not a history book. Those looking for a definitive and complete history of D-Day need look elsewhere. Instead, it brings together a hybrid of historical facts reinforced by the voices of the veterans and a series of vignettes of specific places and events that the veterans I encountered wished to impart. This book is more about the emotions and the impressions of a given moment than the spare facts associated with the discussion. Theirs are the human faces behind the statistics and cold facts, and their presence, their voices, make all the difference. Many of the participants commented on multiple aspects of the war, and their voices are heard where appropriate throughout. Their commentaries derive from personal interviews and informal discussions, notes from a presentation, Bradley, and formal interviews or recollections of events, General Maxwell Taylor and Lieutenant Malcolm Brannan, and appear as direct quotations where possible, or close paraphrase taken from my notes. My most extensive discussions throughout the years were with Gavin and his daughters, Bob Piper, Ben Vandervoort, Bob Murphy, Bill Sullivan, Frank Norris, Susan Eisenhower, and members of the Renault family. These were long-held associations and personal friendships that developed over many years, as the story of Normandy and the French-American relationship it created was fostered among the original participants and continued to evolve. I do not address the British beaches or events, as I did not talk to British veterans of those locations. But I did have extensive discussions at Merville Battery, Ronville Ridge, and Pegasus Bridge with the principals and other veterans. I do not go into depth regarding units at Omaha or Utah, other than what a veteran may have imparted to me. The rest is for other studies. The invasion is such a huge subject that before one can appreciate what the veterans are saying/have said or what occurred, it is necessary to understand the basic facts behind Normandy and D-Day. I have provided that in a summary form at the beginning. The book is then divided into several major sections. Part 1 aims to impart my motivation for writing this book, my first introduction to Normandy as a 10-year-old boy, my subsequent visits there both in and out of uniform, my many discussions with the veterans, and my observations of the Norman people, all created a deep desire to recount the history as I understood it, a history that reflects the purity of purpose and spirit of place that makes Normandy so special. Part 2 covers the background to the invasion. An understanding as to why Normandy was chosen is crucial to understanding what actually occurred there. The place, its geography, and population were manifestly important in how the invasion unfolded. The decision-making process was driven by 3 key parts: a strategic evaluation of German strengths and weaknesses compared to the Allies, likely German responses coupled with ours, and simple geographical facts. Part 3 looks at the groundwork. Once a decision was made as to where and when the invasion would take place, the how became of paramount importance. This process ranged from command selection to force selection to pre-invasion controversies and personalities and supporting programs. All these had to be identified and managed before meaningful training could take place. The actual invasion was a compendium of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Regardless of nationality, rank, or location, thousands of our men did what the Germans thought near impossible. They did it with the ingenuity, drive, and initiative that is an inherent characteristic of our culture. Part 4 is a glimpse of their story, while Part 5 addresses memory and commemoration in Normandy since the end of the war. Due to the way in which I interviewed the veterans, many of my textual quotes are a best recollection from the cryptic notes or a particularly memorable direct quote. I understand that this is not a formal academic approach. However, the quotes are exactly to the point and, I believe, represent the personality and nature of the man. There are several types of quoted material: direct quotes as received in a meeting or letter, a reasonable approximation from notes and memory, or narratives as provided to other forums or publications. I do not attempt to differentiate, other than acknowledging outside sources. In writing this book, I found a number of holes in my personal interviews regarding important aspects of the invasion and its results. I simply did not have a direct interview for that specific point. Hence, I used open-source narratives of veterans that described that place or event, and I so note. Appendix A is a listing of all those I interviewed, corresponded with, and/or discussed the events of the day. There are also many others who gave me insights, but I was unable to recall or note their names. I cite anonymous in several places, which indicates I made notes at the time, but did not record the veteran's name. The appendices also include material that may be of interest to the reader, but would burden the narrative. The point of the book is to impart the power of place and the people that made it so. Much of it, individually or collectively, is viscerally emotional. That is the point. Part 1. An Obsession with Normandy. Chapter 1. Zane. Sergeant Zane Schlemmer, Headquarters and Headquarters Company, 1st of the 508th, 82nd Airborne Division, represents to me the everyman of D-Day. His experiences parallel virtually all other veterans I met. Above all, his humanity and appreciation for being part of something larger than himself for a moment in time is emblematical of them all. While the specifics of the life story are unique to him, the overall context of what he experienced is not. He told me his story in Normandy on his last trip there in 2016. My name is D. Zane Schlemmer. I was born on October 13, 1924, in Canton, Ohio, USA. As of June 6, 1944, D-Day, I was a 19-year-old sergeant in Headquarters Company, 2nd Battalion of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division. My military occupation was forward observer for an 81mm mortar platoon. Soon after my 18th birthday in 1942, I enlisted and volunteered for paratroop duty. I had been attending Northwestern University on a work-study program. I joined the paratroops because I was attracted by the $50 per month jump pay, which would help pay for my post-war college tuition and cost. Also, I really wanted to prove my capabilities, and I also wanted a pair of jump boots and jump wings. And then, a third reason that I joined was that, being of German descent, I felt that we had to make a point and prove our loyalty. After joining the parachute regiment, basic training, jump school, and following tactical training and maneuvers, we arrived in Northern Ireland by boat in January 1944, then to Nottingham, England on St. Patrick's Day, 1944, where we became a part of the 82nd Airborne Division. There, we established our tent base camp, which was used as a base camp for both Normandy as well as the Holland invasion parachute jumps. Although it was cold and we were living in a tent city in Midland, England, we were quite comfortable. We would always have a spot in our hearts for Nottingham, England, and its people. In the airborne, all being volunteers, quite unlike the rest of the military, from the ranks of generals down to the privates, we all jumped together and all shared the same experiences. In the field, there was unusual camaraderie and mutual respect between the officers of all ranks, many of whom were West Pointers, and the enlisted men. We spent most of the pre-invasion months in England, doing many tactical combat exercises for which we had been trained. Most of our training involved jumps, or mock jumps, then assembling and setting up hillside defense positions. All this constant training triggered a great deal of speculation on which country we would be invading. The conjectures and the rumors ranged all the way from Norway down to the Pyrenees Mountains. We were looking forward to our first combat jump. In early June 1944, we boarded a group of ancient English buses with all our combat gear and motored to the airports. Our battalion assembled at Saltby Airfield behind a barbed wire security enclosure. We then all drew combat loads of ammunition. At the time, I was carrying an M1 Garand 30 caliber rifle, mainly because most of my time was to be spent with the front line companies as a forward observer. We had been informed that the German troops had been instructed to give priority to eliminating forward observers, officers, and non-commissioned officers in that order. So by carrying a rifle and wearing my binocular case on the back of my rifle belt, I tried to look as inconspicuous as possible. Other items that we drew were, of course, the ammunition for our mortars and all of the other crew-serviced weapons. In addition to fragmentation and thermite grenades, we each drew a gammon grenade. The gammon grenade was an English invention that was a cotton sock filled with approximately 2 pounds of composition C2, a plastic explosive. This, then, was armed with a very simple impact fuse igniter. They were super for attacking any armored vehicles, and we called them our hand artillery. The gammon grenade was also very popular with us because a very small piece of the C2 plastic, when lit with a match, would burn very fast, very hot, and smokeless, so it was excellent to heat coffee and our K rations in the bottom of our foxholes. So in Normandy, the size of our gammon grenades got progressively smaller each day. Each trooper was also given an anti-tank mine to carry into battle. One of the most puzzling phenomena that I saw during that time was how each trooper went back for extra ammunition and grenades after everybody had drawn their basic load. Despite the weight of the basic equipment, which we each had to carry, everyone tended to increase their potential firepower rather than to rely upon resupply. Our waiting time was spent on equipment inspections, cleaning and recleaning our weapons, sharpening and resharpening our knives, then rolling our mortars, our telephone equipment, and our ammunition all into parapack bundles that would be dropped from the bottom of the respective planes at jump time. We then attached small colored lights to the parapacks, since this was to be a night drop, so that we could locate and identify the respective parapack bundles that had dropped. We then went into sand table sessions of our drop areas and objectives. We were then informed that German troops had occupied our originally planned hill and that our mission had been changed. We were also told that we should jump regardless under any circumstances, and that we were not to return to England with the plane. The first session with the sand tables was without any identifying names, just the terrain with the fields, the roads, the rivers, bridges, and villages. The second session was around the same sand tables, but with English-sounding names near the villages. Evansville, which in the third session became Etienneville, and Port Abbey, which in the third session became Pont l'Abbé, and Pickleville, which in the third session became Picotville. At this third and final sand table session, we were informed that the invasion site was to be Normandy, France, and that our objectives were to block off all German approach routes and their attempts to reach the Utah invasion beach, very much like downfield blocking in a football game. We were then to hold until relieved, and to prepare for further sealing off of the Cherbourg Peninsula after the beach troops had come through to our positions. We were then issued additional items, among which were silk escape maps and tiny compasses which we were to sew in each of our gas-impregnated jumpsuits. We were issued invasion money in several small French franc denominations in the event that we had to purchase anything from the French populace. We were each also issued 2 Benzedrine tablets to help keep us awake and alert, and 2 morphine syrettes for self-administering in the event that we were wounded. I, of course, had no idea at the time of issuance of the Benzedrine tablets or the morphine syrettes that I would have use for both of them before I left Normandy. We were also given a small toy frog clicker, which we were to use for identification and communication upon landing in the pre-dawn darkness of D-Day. 1 click was to be answered by 2 clicks of the clicker. Lastly, we were each issued a yellow life vest. Our M1 rifles were broken down into several parts and put into felt cloth containers that we commonly referred to as violin cases. These were then strapped diagonally across our chest under our reserve parachutes, which meant until we cleared the parachute and harness upon landing and assembled our weapon, that we had very little personal protection. Because of this, I had brought along a small .32 caliber nickel-plated Smith & Wesson short-barrel revolver, which I carried just above my reserve chute and just under my yellow life vest, in the event that I needed it upon landing. D-Day, as you know, was originally scheduled for 5th June 1944, but weather caused a 24-hour postponement. Finally, about 8:30 p.m. on Monday, 5th June 1944, we assembled by stick. There were 18 jumpers in my stick, and we struggled across the airfield to our assigned planes, where we again checked our parapacks for the last time. We all had our last relief stop, for once we had our equipment on and buckled up, it was physically impossible to relieve ourselves. We then blackened our faces, donned our equipment, put on our main and reserve chutes, then the yellow life vest and our helmets and chin straps. We were then pushed or hauled aboard the plane by the plane crewmen, for our individual combat loads were so bulky and heavy that it was impossible for us to get into the planes by ourselves. The moods of the various troopers ranged from nervous chatter and nervous laughter to almost religiously quiet. All minor personality differences between the men were forgotten, and camaraderie prevailed. I recall that I was chewing an entire pack of gum from the time of embarking, and to this day I don't have any recollection of what happened to that mouthful of gum, whether I swallowed it or whether I lost it in drop. We had some reservations about our plane, which was of C-53 configuration, having a relatively smaller exit door than the standard C-47, but this proved to be no problem. I've often thought about the engineer that designed the bucket seat in the troop transport planes, for they definitely were not designed for the combat equipment.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?